everyone. Can you hear me well? Very good. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. Before I speak about our specific engagement with the fashion sector, allow me to provide a bit of context about the global landscape of climate. As you probably know, the Paris Agreement gave us the ultimate goal as a civilization, which is to limit the global temperature rise to well below 1.5 degrees, and that is if we are to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Last year in Poland, governments agreed to the so-called Katowice package, which really means the rules for implementation of the Paris Agreement. This means also unleashing the power of this treaty, which was central to our global efforts to address climate change. We now need to urgently transform or transition into implementation as a matter of urgency. As our executive secretary says, we are now in an age where facts are important. And here are the facts. While nations have made some important progress in the last year, the world remained far behind achieving the goals that it had set to do. Nations are not on track to achieving their goals, therefore they're not even close. We're dreadfully off course. We know climate change will impact all people. It will affect some sooner, some later, but we will all be affected. It will make people sicker, it will increase poverty levels, it will lead to battles over resources like water. We already have seen some of these things happening. We are experiencing changing weather patterns. In Europe, we've had the hottest summer ever recorded in the history of mankind. Climate change is triggering more aggressive tropical storms that produce more rainfall and flooding, and is making storms stronger and deadlier. Ice sheets are melting, sea level is rising. This is a climate emergency, and we all must respond in kind. That means in the near future, we cannot just speak about change. It must be about significantly advancing the pace of change needed to reflect this emergency we collectively face. Specifically, we need deep transformational and systemic change throughout society, change that will result in low emissions, highly resilient, and more sustainable future. To do this, it will take combined efforts of all segments of society, including what we call non-party stakeholders, such as businesses, investors, cities, subnational regions, and civil society. If, say, fashion industry does not do its part, we will not achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. One of the biggest successes or stories in the last year has been the inclusion of groups such as regional governments, private businesses, investors, and the average citizens throughout the world in climate change discussions. We'll continue to engage them because it's this intersection between the state and non-state actors that the science, or IPCC, says we have the best chance of achieving the 1.5 goal. In this spirit, we work to catalyze action with non-party stakeholders in a number of thematic areas, such as land use, water, energy, human settlements, etc. But we also convened industry-led and driven initiatives such as Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. So what is the Fashion Industry Charter? In early 2018, a couple of brand suppliers and industry associations were convened by the UN Climate Change to discuss opportunities for climate action. They told us that progress in climate and sustainability efforts in fashion is largely incremental and falls short of pace and scale needed. They expressed their willingness to move from these incremental actions collectively to industry-wide approaches with clear purpose and goals. They then began translating the Paris Agreement into concrete goals that were anchored in what we're calling today Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. The charter is important in three ways. First, there's a clear plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 30% by 2030, and in the meantime, set out a pathway that will ultimately see the industry achieve climate neutrality by 2050. Second, it's comprehensive and recognizes that to truly make a difference when it comes to emission reductions, the change must be reflected throughout the value chain. This includes from raw material phase to energy efficient ways of manufacturing products, to transportation, consumers, and more. The The Charter seeks to convert the existing dialogue between stakeholders across the value chain into concrete actions and work with finance community and policymakers to create the long-term change. Third, it seeks to build on existing initiatives and look for ways to build capacity and scale best practices. The Charter welcomes supporting organizations who are able to substantively help the fashion industry move towards their targets by sharing their knowledge and their expertise and developing relevant pieces of work. Finally, and this is important, companies who sign on to the Charter told us they do not want this to be just a piece of paper that their CEO signs. And this is, again, very important. They want to back this commitment by real actions, by concrete actions that will give tangible results going forward. This is indeed not just a piece of paper. Certainly, we owe it to the integrity of the UN process to ensure that these commitments are reported, that progress is tracked in a transparent way, and that ambition increases over time in line with the Paris Agreement. By signing the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, companies commit to implement the principles of the Charter, but also to work collaboratively with peers to identify and scale climate solutions by engaging actively in the working groups. This is a very important and key feature of the Fashion Charter. Without hard work from these signatories, it will be very difficult to achieve progress. 7 working groups have been established and operational since February this year. The progress has been quite interesting because only a couple of months passed and the strategic guidance of the initiative has provided for that overarching direction of travel for the Fashion Charter signatories. The strategic guidance, again, is provided by the steering committee, who are co-chairs of different working groups, a group of extremely highly committed individuals coming from 80+ companies that are engaged in conversations to come up with concrete plans on how to move forward. All these groups have their work plans agreed. They're creating, for example, a playbook for brands, retailers, and suppliers aiming to serve as a go-to tool for increasing climate ambition and action. They're working on a measurement and industry decarbonization roadmap. They're exploring concrete and more ambitious targets in relation to raw materials, energy efficiency, scale of renewable energy, and logistics. They're also exploring existing financial solutions and looking for best possible recommendations on what they could attain. They're working out roadmaps for engagement with policymakers, which is quite interesting. And this is only to catalyze enabling conditions for the fashion industry to be able to scale renewable energy in production regions. These stakeholders understand that to be relevant in the near future, they need to take action now. Consumers and investors are increasingly demanding climate action. Shareholders are requesting more climate risk disclosure. The direction that industry needs to take is clear. It is also clear where the impact lies. The largest part of the fashion sector climate footprint is in its supply chain. Thus, discussion and collaboration with manufacturers, most of which are in Asia, are essential for success in achieving net zero emissions in the fashion sector. We welcome Hong Kong brands, suppliers, and retailers to join the fashion industry in this journey. We need manufacturers' input to shape our approach collectively and enable the sector to reach the targets they have set for themselves. Going back to the global picture again, the extremely complex and decentralized nature of climate action makes progress quite fragile. If reduction is happening only at home, but investment in fossil fuel elsewhere continues, we're back to zero. With the scale of investment that will have to be made in the next decades, we cannot afford to lock in polluting technologies and inefficient capital. The window for making the right choices is uncomfortably narrow because of a shrinking carbon budget and because remedial measures will become progressively costlier. Looking at a mutually reinforcing section or intersection between all involved stakeholders and sectors, an inclusive multilateralism to address the challenge of climate change may be the only chance we have to drive ambition leading to both implementation of Paris Agreement and the SDGs. This also goes for the fashion sector as well. Together, we must work towards our goal, the number at which we must limit temperature rise if we're to escape the worst impact of climate change. According to our IPCC, we've got about 11 years to do it. This seems like a lot of time, but it's not. The timeline is short, the goals are incredibly tough to meet, but that's our challenge. We must meet them, and it's our responsibility. Conversations like yours in this conference, where you're looking to jointly explore pathways for addressing environmental impact through policy innovation and business solutions, are very important and can help inspire each other and trigger change back home. More importantly, it's a good opportunity in the region to show the world that you can take ambitious action, that fashion can do it, and we can work collectively towards our common goal. Thank you.